What's up? I'm going to show you today how to edit badly damaged antique photos. Photos that you may have felt that were beyond hope that are actually quite fixable in Photoshop. Now, the Photoshop version I'm going to be using is Adobe CC, the newest version, whatever the last 2019 update was. The reason why this version is better is because the tools that I'm going to be using are a lot more advanced than previous versions. I used to use CS4, which is actually really old and dated, but it turns out a lot of people still have it. Those healing tools they're just old and weren't as good in a lot of ways. If you don't have Adobe CC, the subscription I believe still is $10 a month, and if you have one project, you can do it for $10 and get it over with. Go through a batch of photos and clean it up, because I'm going to show you how easy it really is. And I think Adobe still does free trial versions for like 30 days or something like that, so you could potentially do this for free. Anyway, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, so we opened up Photoshop and are taking a look at our project here. It's an antique photo with a lot of visible damage. It was a scan of the photo, and it was a bad scan, and everything's misaligned because of the wrinkles in the photo due to the water damage, which is what you see here. All these splotches, they wore away at the photo itself. It also wrinkled the paper, and we see those wrinkles, which from the scanner you see the light reflection off of that. So lots of problems there. And if we zoom in nice and close, you can also see all the dust and scratches on the photo from the scan. So a lot to work with here. This is a great example of what you could deal with when editing a photo that needs extensive repair. So let's start easy. We'll just go into lens correction. This is the first step. We want to make sure that everything's lined up and it's cropped in a little bit. We want to get that back first. So let's start with that. So we'll go into lens correction. We'll go to the straighten tool and then take a corner of your choosing. Let's take this top corner here. Click and hold and drag all the way to the other end. Now that straightened it from the top. The bottom you can see is still a little bit off, but it's something to work with. It was part of the scan. It's just it wasn't completely even. So we'll start here. We'll start here, and then we'll hit OK, and that straightened it up for us. Next step is we want to crop in and get rid of some of these borders. So we'll take the crop and we'll pull it in. Now the photo, this is important to do before you crop. Don't just crop in where it's as close in to the borders as possible. That might be instinctively what you want to do, but you want to crop within the parameters, the aspect ratio that you want the final print size to be in, because the goal in the end, I'm sure, would be to print this photo again and have that back up on the wall or back into the album that you want it in. So try to go for whatever the original was. If it's an odd one, pick one that's easy to print in. I believe the aspect ratio of this was an 8.5 by 11. So we'll stick by that and just crop it accordingly. So we'll pull in the corner here. Now remember, it's locked into that aspect ratio, and that's about all we needed to do. There's a tiny edge that I think is overhanging here, but we're not going to worry about that because we want to get it as close to the original crop as possible. So we'll hit OK, and there we go. So there's this little edge here, but we're not going to worry about that because I'm going to show you how to fix that. Okay, so first things first, let's get rid of some of this dust. We have a lot to work with here in fixing these portions, but let's get the dust out of the way so that doesn't distract us, because what we're going to use is a healing tool brush, and we don't want to have to worry about all these little spots and let that distract us. So we'll go into filter, go to noise, and then dust and scratches. Now thankfully we get a little bit of a preview window here and also a preview back here. You can turn that preview on and off to see the progress, and where it's at now is almost perfect. In fact, I might stick with that. So the radius is at 2. And just to show you what that does, that's the how much of a radius it applies to the affected area per pixel, basically. And the threshold is how much tolerance it has to that effect. So you want both, ideally, to be as low as possible. If you go too high, well, then it's just not going to pick up any of that. But also, if you take the radius and go super high, then it gets a little bit horrific. Gets a little freaky, and you obviously don't want that either. So again, get this as low as possible. 1 is too little, so we'll go with 2, and that's pretty much perfect. And then the threshold, we want it just low enough so that we get rid of all the dust that's visible, but at the same time keep the detail in the area. Now, a good way to monitor that is look at the eyes. If you can still see the eyes and they're not getting blurry, or not getting too blurry, then you're probably at a good spot. So let's try 10. 10 seems to be good. We haven't lost any of the detail information that we want, and we got rid of the dust and scratches. Click that on and off. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. We're going to keep it at that. Perfect. So we got the dust and scratches out of the way, and that was easy. It's just a filter you apply on and off. Now for the more tricky part. It's healing all these areas, which thankfully in this photo there weren't any on the faces. At least nothing big. I think there's a spot right here by his lip. It's not bad. Now if there was a huge spot like that over his face, that would be a nightmare to fix. You'd basically have to sew patches from other places and just try to art your way out of that. But there would be no real coming back from that to a full restoration aspect. Thankfully, most of the damage is in the background and in areas that don't have too much detail and that we can fix. There's a few areas that might be a little tricky right by her dress where there's a line that we got to fill, but that's still doable. So we're going to attack that now. So obviously I'm not going to go through the whole video taking each spot and cleaning those up. So we'll address an area and then go from there. Then I'll finish out and then show you the end result. So for this, you want to go to the spot healing tool, which is right on the corner here. It's the band-aid with the little marquee tool around it. And you're going to adjust the size to the area that you basically just want to cover the affected area. I bet you can hear my cat in the background. He gets a little vocal when he can't see you. He's trying to give advice. Anyway, so you go in here and you just cover that area and then poof, it's gone. It's like magic. In fact, it almost feels like cheating, but there is a little bit of art to it. So say you were just to go willy-nilly with this thing and just cover a bunch of areas and hope it fixes it. Well, you're going to end up with a horrible nightmare like that, and it's going to swish everything around. It used to be a whole lot worse. It used to be a lot less generous than that. Basically how this tool works is you select an area that you want to basically get fixed, healed, and it will sample information that's all around it and figure out what's the best like pixels to substitute in that area. And then poof, gone. Perfect. One of the old school ways that was taught, in fact it's how my dad taught me, was the clone stamp tool, which you would alt select an area and then basically push pixels from that area to that one. And with a lot of clever opacity tricks, you would have to blend that, but it's just not the best way to deal with this. It's a lot more complicated, and it still has its place, but not in this scenario. The heal tool is just so much better. So keep that brush as small as you can manage, and you'll be doing all right. So you want to go in and clean up those areas. Now, for an area that has a line that you want to maintain, that's where it's going to get tricky. So first, you're going to want to try to clean up as much areas around it that don't have that detail, so that the reference pixels won't pull any unneeded information there and kind of ruin it for you. So try your best to stay as close to it as possible to give it some frame of reference. You don't have to be perfect, but you can sure try. And that's about as close as I'd want to get it. That's pretty good. What's going to be tricky is right here. So again, we're going to want to fix these areas first that are around it to give it enough information to know what to do once we get to that bigger splotch. And remember, so this little dot is just outside the line where the tree is. So you don't want to cover it like this, because then it might remove some of that tree. So you want to go to the outer side, and then it'll do a much better job and not remove that detail. So those are the things that you want to watch for when you're using the spot healing tool. So now that we cleaned up a fair portion around it, now we can go in and try to fix it. And then poof. It did a good enough job where I'm not too worried about that line. Now, if you want to be obsessive over it, there's a trick that I'm going to show you, and it goes back to the clone stamp tool, and this is where this comes in handy. So we'll select a line right here, go straight above it, and it'll show us a sample of how it's going to paint that. So we just follow that line up, and then boom, you have your tree line yet again. So you basically want to follow those principles along the whole photo, and it's going to be a lot of work. And I'll just show you a few more tricks around here. So this area right here is a huge affected area, but there's no real detail back here. So you don't have to worry about how big the brush is per se. So let's go in there and get aggressive with the brush. Make it a little bit bigger and just go right into the affected area. Poof, a lot better. So there's a little bit of a bleeding edge here, but that's okay. We'll just go in here and smudge it out with the healing tool yet again. Now, another area we might worry about is down here by her dress. Now this, I recommend zooming in on quite a bit. So we'll take this, we'll make the brush a bit smaller. We'll go in here and very carefully follow the edge. We're not going to touch this area too much just yet. And it may take a few passes. But eventually, you can kind of fix this area like so. And then we have this area to worry about. Boom. Don't want to cross over the edge where it gets darker. We'll start this way first. Okay, it's done pulling information there. So now we want to fix the darker edge. Then we'll clean this up. Remove the last few specks here. And we have the corner of a dress again. Pretty awesome. Now I know this tool, it does a lot of work automatically, and it does feel like cheating, but you do have to follow a few guidelines in order to use it best. And that's pretty much it for that. So I'll go in and clean up the rest of these spots and then show you the next step. Okay, now that I went in and cleaned up the rest of these spots, it's already looking tremendously better. I mean, who would have thought that you could get it restored to this level again after having so much water spots and damage? But it's still not perfect. We still have these lightened areas from the folds of the paper during the scan. As you can see, I did clean up the corner here with the healing brush tool. So that's cleaned up there. So everything is cleaned up pretty good. We just have these light leak areas. So in order to fix that, a good start is to go to the burn tool, and we'll get a brush size, and I'll try to stick to a brush size that's about the same width as the light leak. Adjust it accordingly, and we're going to go for midtones with the burn tool and shadows. We'll start with midtones and have the exposure very, very low to like 8%. You're going to want to work this in gradually. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be a good start, and we'll use a final effect in the end to fix that totally. So that's not being as effective as wanted, so let's move to shadows. Okay, and you don't necessarily have to do this. This depends on the situation, but again, this is more applying to the areas that the scanner kind of messed up. But this is a good start. Okay, so I think we're about done with that. Let's try one more with shadows. Not see too much. Let's fill in this, and this, a little bit here. Okay, and that's it for now. So the final effect that will bring this all together is we go to filter and then camera raw filter. This is basically Lightroom inside of Photoshop, and we're gonna go to presets and then go to lift shadows. We're gonna select that, then we're gonna go over to detail. Now that already looks pretty good, and what it does is it helps flatten some of the worser bits, some of the areas that are uneven, and kind of makes it look a little bit better. But we're gonna ramp up some detail a little bit so it's a little less blurry looking, and then we're going to bring up the shadows because this area is just so dark. We can't really see what's going on with the suit. I mean, it is the style of the picture. There's nothing we can do. That is just a black area, but there are some details inside the arm here that we can bring out and just make this look a little less aggressively contrasty. And then we can bring the highlights down just a little bit so it's a much more even looking photo. That is looking quite a bit better. So this is a sepia picture. This is a little bit too red, I think, to look natural. So we'll bring down saturation just a little bit, and that's looking better in my opinion. And this is kind of where your taste will fit in. You may have to change things depending on the photo, but this is basically what you're gonna look for. And let's try clarity just a little bit. Ah, there we go. That's pretty cool. I like that. We're getting more detail out of this. And that's pretty much it. Once you've done this, you can see a few extra lines that you could clean up afterward with the tools that I showed you, especially the healing tool. This also just looks good as a style. I mean, having a few scratches in here can make it look pretty natural, but you could go in for the final effect and just heal the rest of these out that you see there. But I kind of like it the way it is, and I actually made a edit of this already, which is much more finalized, and I will show you that in just a second. But this gives you a good idea of how to restore the photos. And just like that, you can see just how easy it is to edit old photos and restore them back to their former glory. Hope that this video was helpful, and for more video content like this and other helpful tech tips, subscribe to this channel. Alright guys, I'll see you later.